Hello again and welcome back to our course on Access 2013 Advanced. In this section we're going to start to look at action queries. So far we've virtually exclusively looked at select queries on this course, but there are other types as well, and I'm going to look at an example or two of each of those starting here. Now you may well have noticed earlier on that a couple of students in the student database have as their states in their address the full name of their state. And of course it would be very straightforward for me now to go in and change those entries to use the 2-character codes for those states. But let's suppose that the student database has actually got thousands or tens of thousands of names and addresses on it. It'd be very laborious to go through and change them all by hand individually. So we use a particular type of action query that you may well have come across before, called an update query, and we can actually do an update whereby all students for whom the address includes a state province of Tennessee, we change the state province from Tennessee to the 2-character code TN. So let's write a query to do that. On this occasion I'm only going to need to use the student table, and from the student table I only need the state province field. Now if I were just fetching all of the students whose state province is Tennessee, I could literally just write in here as the criterion Tennessee. Let's just see how that looks in SQL. Straightforward enough. Select student state province from table students where the state province is Tennessee. We go back into design view again. Now to turn that into an update query, we just change the query type. Watch what happens to the grid at the bottom when I change it to an update query. The options that are available, a couple of them disappear, but we get a new one which is update to. And if I put TN in double quotes, that's now basically an update query. And what it will do is to find all the students whose state province is Tennessee and update the state province to TN. Again, let's have a look at the SQL for that. And there we are. Now I could run that. It's actually pretty straightforward, to be honest with you, so let's make it a little bit more complicated and a little bit more interesting. Now as you can see from this statement, it's doing a straightforward select, although it doesn't use the word select, but it specifies a where clause, and using Tennessee in the where clause as the students defined, and in the set clause, the set action, setting the state province to TN, this particular query could actually be made much more useful if I could use it to turn any state province name into the appropriate code. You may also notice there was another student with a different state province, and what I don't really want to have to do is to go through and edit this query over and over again to deal with all of the states that I need to change. So what I can do is do this not just as an update query, but as a parameter query as well. Parameter queries in Access 2013 are very straightforward to do. You could do it either in the SQL version of the query or in the design version. So I'm going to go back into design view, and what I'm going to do is where it says update to and then I've got TN in double quotes, I'm going to change that to a prompt. And the prompt is put in square brackets to be identified as a prompt. And I'm going to put as my prompt enter state code. And then for the criterion that goes in the where clause, I'm going to change that also to a prompt, and that's going to say enter full state name. So both the update to and the criterion are in square brackets, which means that I'll be prompted for them when I run the query. Okay, let's try running the query and see what happens. Enter the state code. Well, the state code is TN. Click on OK. Enter the full state name, Tennessee. Watch what happens when I click on OK. I get a warning. you're about to update one row. Once you click yes, you can't use the undo command to reverse the changes. This is always a useful message, apart from obviously reminding you about that. It also gives you a little count there, only one row. And I know there was only one student, so that's quite reassuring. So let's tick on yes. Go to the student table, and the student that had Tennessee as their state province has now got TN as their province. And if I go back into the query again and click on design, run the query again, enter state code MN, enter full state name, Minnesota, click on OK, one again, back into the students table again, we're all done. So that's an update query created as a parameter query. And don't forget to take a look at how that looks in the SQL view, because as you can see, the actual structure of the query is exactly the same, except that now instead of a literal value like double quotes TN double quotes for the state code for Tennessee, it actually puts the prompt in square brackets, enter state code. And similarly for the full state name, what was there before literally Tennessee now has a prompt of enter full state name. So you should be able to create that kind of parameter query using SQL, because the notation is very straightforward in the Access version of SQL. The example of an update query that you've just seen is a pretty straightforward one, where we replaced a string in a field with a different string in the same field, although we did use a parameter query approach to it. Very often when you're doing update queries, you may have some more complex processing to do. And what I'd like to do now is to demonstrate a more complex update. I'm going to use as an example, and of course this is a fictitious example, the area codes in these home phone numbers. The area codes here are, I believe, largely speaking correct. The phone numbers, of course, are all fictitious, but I'm going to suppose that the New York area code 212 is going to be replaced by area code 211. So if you take this particular student here, what we want to do is to change their phone number so that the area code 212 becomes an area code 211. Now this is not such a straightforward update, because of course what we've got to do in this case is to actually do a bit of surgery on the phone number to replace the 212 in brackets with a 211 in brackets. If you've used string handling functions in Office before, maybe in Access before, maybe in VBA before, you'll know that there are various ways that you can do this using standard string handling functions. But we're going to use a specific function, the replace function, to do this particular update. So I've started off just with a straightforward select statement. It's always a good idea, if you're going to do an update, to start with a select statement on its own, just to make sure that you're getting the correct data out of your database. So in this case, my criterion is like, and then it's 212 in brackets followed by any number of characters. Let's just run that to make sure that I get all of the students with those New York phone numbers. There are only 4. Of course, I could put their first names and last names in there as well and do a bit of a double check if I wanted to, but I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go back into Design View. Now we've got to look at what we're going to set those phone numbers equal to. Now we're going to need to make this into an update query, so let's click on Update. And the value we're going to update it to is going to be the existing phone number with the area code in brackets, 212 in brackets, replaced by 211 in brackets. We're going to do that using one of the built-in functions in Access 2013. If you've done this sort of string manipulation before, you may well have a good idea of what that function is. But before we do so, what I'm going to do is to save this query. And the reasons for saving this query will be apparent in a moment. So I'm just going to click on Save, and I'm going to call it Area Code Change. Click on OK. Now let's go back to that Update toolbox. Let's right click and we're going to click on Build. We're going to use the Expression Builder to build the new version of the student's home phone number. Now in order to do manipulation of a string like this, we're going to use one of the built-in functions within Access 2013, and there are many of them. One of the big problems you have is knowing which function to use, and if you've done string manipulation in Access or VBA or another element of the Office suite, or perhaps in BASIC in general, then you're going to know there are many ways of manipulating strings. We're going to use a very straightforward function, the replace function, and I think in this particular case it'll work very neatly, and it's relatively straightforward to understand as well. To find the string functions, if you click on the plus next to functions, you'll see that they're divided into three main groups: the built-in functions, any functions within the student database itself, and then any available web services. Now what we want is one of the standard built-in functions. These are then categorized in many cases according to the type of application that you're working on. So for instance, there's a financial category, there's a mathematical category, and so on. What we want here is functions that are text functions. We get a list of those text functions on the right. If you're an experienced programmer in BASIC, Visual Basic, or some variant of that, you've probably got a good idea now of which function you're going to use. It may not be the replace function. There isn't a right way and a wrong way of doing this. I'm not sure there's even a best way and a worst way. But replace works pretty well for me, so I'm going to double click on replace. And now we have the replace function in place with its 6 arguments. And let's do some work on working out which of those 6 arguments we need and which value we need to put in each of those arguments. Now there's a description at the bottom here, and part of the description is a link through to explain in detail what all of the arguments are. So let's just click on that and take a look. So basically, once you've identified a function that you either know will do the job or you think might do the job, that'll give you a link through, normally to some point within the MSDN site, and explain in a reasonable level of detail what the function does and what the purpose of each of the arguments is. Now in this case, the string expression, the first argument is the string we're doing the replacement in. The second argument is the string we're searching for. The third argument, replace, is the replacement substring. And then the other 3 arguments, first of all there's a start argument, which is optional, which is the position within the string you're searching in where the substring search is to begin. If this is omitted, 1 is assumed, so 1 is fine for us, so we can omit this argument. Argument 5 is also optional. That's the count of the number of substring substitutions to perform. If omitted, the default value is -1, which means make all possible substitutions. Well, in a phone number there can only be one occurrence of the area code, so we can leave that one out as well. And then the final argument is the compare argument, and this links back to the option compare database that we talked about earlier in the course, which determines how string comparisons are done, particularly affecting alphabetic characters. Now in this case we're not doing any kind of less than, greater than, it's a straight equal to of numeric characters, so we can omit that one as well. So let's go back into the expression builder, and we can say the string we want is, well, that's straightforward enough because we know that it's home phone. The find in this case, we know that as well. The replace in this case, also fine. And then the other 3 arguments we don't need. So all we need to do then is click on OK. And if I look at it in Query Design, you can see what the query now looks like. Obviously you could check it in SQL View as well. Let's give that update a try. Click on Run. You are about to update 4 rows. Yep, we're going to update 4 rows. Let's click on Yes. Now we can look at the student table to make sure that those 4 New York students have had their home phone numbers updated correctly. And there we are, the one we selected earlier, who had a 212 area code, has now got a 211 area code. So that's an example of a more complex update query. One thing I mentioned earlier on was it's a good idea to save your query before you begin. One of the reasons for that is that if you do that, then the query will appear in the expression elements down here, and if you need some property, something associated with the query, it'll be easier to identify it in the expression elements list on the left here, in this tree structure on the left. And finally, our movie rental business is doing a special offer on Blu-ray rentals, and any Blu-ray rental which is over $5 is going to be reduced by 50 cents. Any less than or equal to $5 are not effective, but any over $5 there's a 50-cent reduction. My answer to that is example 14. I'll see you in the next section.